Welcome to Unstoppable at Craig, where we pull back the curtain on what makes healthy workplace cultures click and what happens when people are empowered to expand the boundaries of what is possible. We'll explore the perspectives of employees and leaders who have carte blanche to speak their truths, tell their stories, and unlock uncommon ways of approaching challenges. I am Dr. Jandel Allen-Davis, CEO and President of Craig Hospital, a world-renowned rehabilitation hospital that exclusively specializes in the neurorehabilitation and research of patients with spinal cord and brain injury. Join me as we learn from people who love what they do and what happens when fear doesn't stifle innovation. Have you ever felt like you're speaking a different language to your teams? I could tell you so many stories, and thankfully I think there have been fewer of them as I've sort of had more experience and hopefully grown and learned from the teams. But I remember one of the best examples of this being I was a young leader in the medical office that I was working in at Kaiser Permanente. You know, had all these just brimming with ideas and things we could do or should do and could do. And felt like I was working a little bit at cross purposes, or certainly they weren't understanding much. And I remember thinking about the metaphor of whitewater rafting, which we've had a chance, and I've had a chance to do a little bit of in my life. And when you come to the rapids, you actually pull the raft out and you actually try to read the river. And you and your team of whoever's in the boat, you look at it, sort of figure out how you're going to actually navigate your way through the rapid, which side of the rock, whatever it is that you're going to do. And I remember thinking about that as a great metaphor for this idea of speaking a different language, and went on to write, I'll never forget that we start down this, I think I got great sort of alignment. We know what we're going to do. We know how we're going to shoot this thing. We get in the back of the raft and we take off and we hit the first part of the rapids and someone goes flipping out of the boat. All the gear is gone. Luckily, we didn't tip the raft. But by the time we get down, I'm one of the people who's fallen out, and I got a big old gash across my head, and we pull to the side of the river, and I say, wow, what happened? I thought that we really had clarity around what we're doing. And one of the more courageous team members speaks up and says, well, you never actually asked us if we really understood. You just sort of said, this is what we're going to do, and you said it with some kind of way that we all just sort of went along with it. Well, you know, the interesting thing about that as a metaphor for leading teams, whether they're clinical or administrative, is very much akin to that. And at Craig, we have doctors, therapists, nurses, psychiatrists, social workers who come together on one team, each of them having a different level of expertise, different perspectives, and approaches to how we're going to treat that one patient. And in an effort to make sure that our patient can interpret what we're saying and have an active role in their own rehabilitation, it becomes essential that our team of experts are speaking with one language, that they know how we're going to shoot those rapids, as it were. You know, experts on one interdisciplinary team often have a challenge of learning the team's language, right? And making sure that we're creating the space for them to put that language into the room to get the highest quality product. And it's not specific to healthcare settings by any means. You know, we see it in the software industry where you can have developers, managers, designers, and IT specialists all coming together to hopefully create great products that help all of us sort of navigate and make our way through the world. Well, I'll tell you that as leaders, it's our obligation to understand the nuances of that kind of language, to foster communication, and to alleviate the tensions that can come up as a natural part of working in teams, all at the benefit of the team, but ultimately our patients or our customers. Well, we're going to talk to Dr. Andrew Park today, who has a one-of-a-kind role at Craig. He spends about a day a week actually caring for patients as a spinal cord injury physician, and then the other 4 days as a research scientist. And if ever there were two languages that you think would be hand in glove and are not at all, it would be these two. So he splits his time between Craig's dual focuses on neurorehabilitation and research. And he's able to provide some important insights, I believe, into both areas of care, which he describes as often speaking different languages. The way he thinks about problems and the way he approaches solutions to these problems in research and clinical work are often very different. And this can be both a benefit and a challenge while collaborating on an interdisciplinary team. Andrew understands the opportunities and the challenges of what happens when we bring together those who are the best in their field to treat a patient. So welcome, Andrew. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Jandel. I really appreciate you having me on today.
So, when we think about sort of this beauty of navigating two roles. I could imagine that there's some real cool moments, but also it can create some challenges. Why don't you just sort of riff a little bit on what those are like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have one of the best jobs in the world. Becoming a physician was such a lifelong goal. And as I kind of traverse the process and training, as you're aware of, to become a physician, I found that in some ways, the position would bottleneck you into certain roles within the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And so an opportunity to also be able to kind of flex this different muscle and become a researcher, it's really quite dichotomous and contradicting to each other a lot of the time. But what I find just so much fun about my role is that when I'm providing clinical care and I'm frustrated with whatever the healthcare system or whatever I'm seeing from a clinical perspective, I can take and channel that energy into something creative on the research side to say, now I have a goal. I have something that I can try to solve using research. But then sometimes research can feel very far away from helping anybody. Mm-hmm. And so the ability to take that context of saying, well, I'm doing this daily grind of research, which oftentimes is a pretty obscure and a hard thing to define. And I can take it back into the clinic and say, well, this is why I'm going through these steps that sometimes feel monotonous or far from actually helping anybody, with the hope that it'll actually help people one day. And really the beauty of it is that being able to do both roles, they really serve each other. That way, my clinical questions that I'm asking in my clinics and my practice, I have the process to turn it into a research question, which then I can apply with scientific method to actually answer a fundamental question that helps me in the clinic. And vice versa, where sometimes the research world gives you something interesting, but sometimes it's hard to understand the context of whether that's going to help somebody. But so again, being able to bring that information back to the clinic and say, well, this is where this might be applicable. Or the ability to pivot and say, this is super interesting, but actually I just don't see a path for this to actually help anybody. So being able to make that quick switch and say, interesting, but not relevant, let's move on. That's the benefit of being in both worlds that I enjoy so much about my job.
Yeah, I could also, though, it's interesting, and it's funny that I thought about that navigating a river and, whitewater rafting metaphor, because I could also imagine that there are things you see clinically that, boy, this would be exciting and interesting to think about taking back to a research team and having them go, huh? Or the other way, the challenge of we really do have an opportunity to answer a significant and important clinical question, and you take it to clinicians and it's met the same way. And do people candidly say, huh, or do they just sort of nod? And that's how we get the crazy, everybody's out of the raft by the end of it. Or on a serious note, you come up with great research questions, great research findings, and we have a heck of a time both translating them, let alone using them in clinical practice. Because that feels like the challenge, the other side of this.
100%, Jandel. I would say that is the biggest struggle and the real defining moment of translational medicine versus not, is that I see that every single day, is where a great question is just not appreciated. And this is true in both directions and in every facet of what it takes to do good research or provide good clinical care. So this is not just researchers and clinicians that are working together or sometimes not working together, but also funding sources, whether it's an insurance provider on the clinical side or a funding agency for research projects. They can't see the potential oftentimes when you're trying to describe why this is important. And those things influence how we end up practicing in both ways, right? So in clinical practice, we may make decisions that are driven by not always for best patient care, but because of payer sources and those kind of things. And vice versa, that happens in research, where oftentimes our endpoints is about getting more funding, not necessarily when will this translate? How do I get this in the hands of people who can actually take care of patients with this? That dissemination piece that we oftentimes forget. Yeah. And so, yes, 100%. I think that's the underlying messaging that is so important and kind of the theme of our talk today, which is the ability to talk multiple languages, because that's where that translation stops. And if you're able to communicate with multiple different parties in ways that they can understand the benefit, I think that's the real legitimate way of getting past that barrier to make researchers go, aha, I see the importance. And for clinicians to say, aha, I see how that research can end up helping my patients one day.
So how, when you think about this notion of different languages, when I think about what we do here, and as I said, therapists of all sorts, psychologists, nursing, there's all sorts of folks who rally around and wrap themselves around patients when they come in. How do we respect, or do we respect, the different languages and the different voices in that room?
Yeah, that's a great point. I can summarize that in one major concept, which is kind of the gray zones and the tension that exists within interdisciplinary teams and how critical that is to a successful team. The trust portion really comes with, especially people in leadership roles, is to really just be genuine and vulnerable. And so I just think it's just human nature that if you're kind of set in an environment where everyone is really targeting one specific goal, like we do at a hospital, which is to help the patient, right? That's what we fundamentally want to do every day. And then you bring a team member into your team. The best way to integrate them into your team is to give them something worthwhile to do, to contribute to the team. And sometimes team members have a hard time knowing how they're going to contribute unless they find gaps or problems or something that the team isn't good at that they are good at, or maybe the best at. Maybe there's a lot of people who are good at something, but they're really the best person. How can we set them up to take on that role? As leaders, I find that many leaders who tend to be more extroverted individuals who like to talk and people who fill the room, sometimes it's hard to vulnerably say, I'm really bad at this. I'm really bad at this, and I need my team members to rally around me and help me with this portion because I'm surely not an expert in this. So whether it's self-deprecating humor or whatever it may be, your team needs to feel like they have space to contribute, in every single day. And so there are some natural, obvious components to that, which is that I'm not a physical therapist or an occupational therapist or any member of our interdisciplinary team. I couldn't do their job. And so there's naturally expertise on the team. But then there are like the non-measurable components.
The intangibles.
The intangibles, yes. They're the who's the most organized person in the group, or who is the most tactful person, Sometimes you need, the stern parent in the group for a certain type of patient, while other times you need a much more softer hand with other types of patients. It's the psychologist's job to deal with the patient's feelings. That was with the question mark in quotes. Okay.
Right.
So no, it's not, because they may be able to help influence our thought process and how to work with a certain patient, but we all have a role to play in making the patient feel comfortable, confident, and progressing both through the grieving process and understanding of their new injury, but then to get the most out of them every single day to set them up for success. And I'll tell you, being part of Craig Hospital, what I love is we have these very highly integrated teams on the clinical side and the research side that allow individuals and the team themselves to figure out these roles, and over time through knowing each other and trusting each other. So without saying names, there are certain physicians in the group who by delegated authority are the leaders of the group and are not the most organized human beings. Great human beings, but there are members of their team that keep that team organized.
That's so cool.
And they serve a different role, right? Like context and big picture. While there are other teams where the physician is the driver of the organization and the dictator of the agenda, but that allows the team to work in different ways and have other types of strengths that they bring to the table and are able to provide to the patient.
Gosh, so I heard trust, I heard vulnerability, I heard humility, and this notion of leveraging the team's strengths, those intangible strengths that actually aren't that intangible if we're paying attention and really getting to know our team members well. We sort of know who we need to have fly in at a given point, and making sure that all the team members know that their sort of content knowledge that they bring and expertise, but they also bring their humanity, they bring their humanness that is important too. How does this look on the research side? Same sorts of...
Yeah, I think the research side it's been a learning experience for me as well, but overall, it's really the same themes and the same concepts, but applied in a very different way. I think the context and the timelines and the urgency is different on the research side. And that would be my criticism. But also, but at the same time, there's a thoughtfulness and a rigorousness to research that sometimes is lacking on the clinical side. And so bringing that marriage it creates a lot of tension. And I bet there are clinicians who think maybe a little too slow and methodical when it comes to some clinical things, or maybe too abstract. And there's probably some researchers who think I'm just a little too much pedal on the metal and say, slow your roll a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's because living in both worlds, you try to kind of find the middle place and provide that tension.
So say a little bit more then how you navigate that, because you are between two worlds.
Yeah.
Right. And actually within those worlds, there are multiple languages.
100%.
Statisticians, biostatisticians, talking to research scientists, talking
Absolutely.
to the people who really understand the technology and the databases.
Yeah.
There are
Absolutely.
clinicians and there are people who have never touched patients who are also doing this same work.
Right. 100%. So I think it starts by saying it out loud and providing that context to everyone you talk to. So I have the same spiel. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to clinicians or researchers or patients and their family members. I start by saying it is contradictory to do research and be a clinician. It is contradictory. As a healthcare, as a physician, my job is to do no harm. That is what I vowed to do. And under that mandate, providing solid, concrete evidence and trying to minimize risk to my patient is priority number one. But as a researcher, it's the exact opposite, actually. We're trying to push the science and innovate, and that inherently has harm and potential risks. And so my job as a researcher is to inform about the harm and the consenting
potential
process.
harm.
The potential harm.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Exactly. So the potential risks that we're taking
Right.
push the science. And that role can be really difficult to navigate if your participant in a research project also happens to be your patient in the clinic. And so those lines can be really blurred, really most importantly for the patient and their family members. So when I'm consenting a patient for one of my studies, I talk about putting on my researcher hat. This is a different person you're talking to right now.
Wow.
I have biases now as a researcher that I don't have as your physician. And so that's how I talk about it. I need you to participate in this study because you participating equals me finishing the study, which will mean me getting funding for a different study. And I have to there's this incentive bias that I have. So I lay it out for my patients who are now my participants. And I ask the same of my colleagues. When I come into a room and I talk to a group of researchers, I give them that context and say, listen, the battle that we have in front of us is that clinicians do not want to put their patients in any higher risk of harm than they absolutely need to. And every day we come in here and ask them to put their patients in more potential harm than them not participating in the study. So that's the context. So we got to be really sure we're going to do something meaningful for these participants, that we're going to push the science in a meaningful direction. And I would argue we can't do that without the clinicians.
Yeah.
And vice versa, though, because clinicians, just as you mentioned, statistics, research methodology, funding language, it's a bureaucracy, all the things that operationalize research is not necessarily taught not very high language in medical training necessarily.
Right.
Just because you're a clinician doesn't necessarily mean you really understand what it takes to do research. Is a clinical question really a research question? Is this something that research can answer right now with what we have and feasibility and all the components that's necessary for research? So that gets lost to clinicians relatively frequently because you can't see the end game of how this little tiny study may improve things in the future. But vice versa, without that knowledge and that potential, then we may choose to throw the baby out with the bathwater every time. So that was a really long way of saying you first point that out and give that kind of perspective. And then the rest of it is, again, that humility piece. You have to ride that line of knowing just enough to be dangerous. I'm not a statistician, but I know enough statistics so I can start talking to a statistician, the basis of how they're thinking through the process. And realizing that if I try to do this by myself, I'd make a mess of statistics and do some bad things. But be able to start that conversation with them and vice versa with other fields.
Talk a little bit about what does it take to be that kind of high-performing interdisciplinary team, whether we're talking clinical or research or, frankly, even administratively.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great setup. I think back to my medical training and something I noticed immediately when I entered the rehabilitation world as a good starting place, which is back when I was in medical school, the idea of interdisciplinary rounds with the patient in front of the ICU bed, that was kind of a hot topic, still is. We still trying to perfect it. So the idea that every member of this interdisciplinary team stands around and talks about the patient together. And what a great idea. What a great concept. And then I came into the rehabilitation world and said, man, we've been doing this forever. This has been just how we functioned for the longest time. But it's not that there's something different that I couldn't quite put onto it until later into my career, which is that an interdisciplinary team that are standing and talking about their specific discipline, a pharmacist talking about medications, a physician talking about some sort of management plan, the case manager talking about a disposition program. These are all good things. It's good for us to all hear what each of us are doing. But that's not truly the power of a true interdisciplinary team. The power is when, as a physician, I know something about your job as a physical therapist or as a case manager. Through osmosis, through mutual discussions and education, and the team being the same team for a long period of time, I can become a case manager light and understand their world a little bit better, have really a scope of what they're doing when they're not with me on a daily basis. Oh yeah, I know that my case manager is going to go and orient with the patient and within the first 2 to 3 days because they really love to do that. And then I know they're going to talk about this component and the pair source and do all of these things. There's an entire meeting called a focus meeting here at Craig that doctors are not invited to on purpose because it's very important for them to stay focused, and that might be hard with the physician in the room. So
that's funny.
There are all these pieces that are happening outside of my realm that I know they're going to be doing because I understand that case manager and how they function and how a physical therapist functions and the nuances of what their evaluation and care are doing. And this is really hard to do after your training is ended. Because now we got a job to do, right? You got to do your job as a physician. And so that's a full-time thing. But if you're with the same team with long enough, you can get this osmosis and learn about what their roles are beyond these very superficial contact points. And then if you can start predicting what your team's going to do and start communicating that with your patient and their family members, just again, full loop back to just setting up your team for success every time. You know that if so-and-so therapist on my team is definitely going to talk to you about bathroom equipment on day 2. So if something about the bowel program comes up, you can say, so-and-so is going to talk to you about this tomorrow. And then guess what? They come in and then they say it. And they're like, oh yeah, everybody's on the same page here. Everybody's getting it. Everybody, there's a process of that. And again, I can only say it long-windedly because I still don't have a great name for what that is, but it's a level of interdisciplinariness that really crosses disciplines.
How do you, as a physician, as a research scientist, as a leader, sort of deal with the mythical part of Dr. Park when you know darn well, and we know it, even as the good clinicians, you don't get that stuff done by yourself.
100%. Oh, that's great segue. What a great topic. The most important thing is when there are situations where you are deemed the expert or the person in charge by the system and not by reality or actual how things work in real life, you point that out to your team. You point out the ridiculousness of some of our roles. So, I've given this example before of there are many cases in interdisciplinary teams where the physician's signature is the end game of the process, right? Yeah. So, I just had our therapist work on this extremely complicated wheelchair prescription involving every nut and bolt and chair and cushion and every delivery system. And then at the end of the day, they need my signature for this to be prescribed. I couldn't tell you, from front and back, everything I know about wheelchairs is from my team. And so, but there's that ridiculousness where I need to sign that for the insurance company to authorize this wheelchair. And so you got to point that out to your team and say, this is ridiculous. We both know this is ridiculous, but we're going to go through the motions because that's going to help the patient.
It's going to help the patient.
At the end of the day, that's what we're here for, right? So sometimes we have to be okay with some ridiculous things and deal with the realities of a system if we know that the end goal is this. But I'm right there with you. I'm never going to question you on your decision regarding some piece of equipment that I have no expertise really on.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how you move from that delegated authority, someone told you your boss, to legitimate authority, from being vulnerable, pointing out your flaws, and looking for answers. Another way is to just, again, if you really know your team and where the expertise lies, use that.
Yes.
Nothing more valuable than going to a team member with the problem and saying, I don't have a solution for this, and I think you're really good at this. What do you think? Every chance to try to get feedback, get out of your own head, even if you have an answer that you think is excellent, to go to the members of the team that are truly experts, and not placation, and within the team, they know this person's really good at talking through these tough situations, or this person's really level-headed and could handle this really well, or this is our expert on a very specific topic, like, that might be field specific. No one in the team questions that if you say, I went to this member of the team to talk about that, and I'm going to come to you for this type of topic. And there isn't any hurt feelings when you didn't talk to everyone every time about every problem, because everyone in the team knows, if I had that problem, I would go to that person too.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's I had I don't know if you've heard the phrase, a bust your buttons proud moment last week at the hospital board meeting. And I think is actually one of the best board meetings we've had, when we had not people with big titles, directors or vice presidents, but we had some folks who are truly the experts present on different topics. And, I wouldn't have done that anywhere close to as well, anywhere close. And I would even challenge my other executive team members to say, and we couldn't have done it that way either. So I think what you're speaking to is that the way we get out of this notion of the mythical or the charismatic, leader of teams or of research projects and research work, let alone the chair that I get to occupy right now, is to let them speak, give them the spotlight from time to time and let them do it. And you also have no idea where it'll take them in their career. So another great way to think about it. Thanks, though, for spending time with us today to talk about this notion of, we talked about a lot of notions, but this notion of really the languages that we speak and how translating them, which is, not a technical exercise. It's not head, it's heart and gut. Is how we pull those two together.
Absolutely. Comes down to people. Comes
down to just people and caring about them, and you do it beautifully. So thank you.
It was my honor. I appreciate it. I love these conversations. I'd love to have some more in the future.
It's a real privilege and honor to have the opportunity to talk to a physician colleague, and interestingly, one who's relatively early in his career relative to my age and where I am. And to think that a guy who's figured out and has channeled this sort of wisdom so early in his career is going to continue to provide lots of great learnings over the decades that he continues to practice. But what are those essential ingredients, those preconditions to creating the environment for teams to flourish? It's about providing, as a leader, real clarity around what it is that we seek to do. And it can be hard. In all honesty, that level, the kind of clarity that people will need, especially as we take on audacious and big work in our organizations, requires that we slow down enough to do two things. One, to figure out what's the language that is going to speak to the hearts and the minds of people who have to do the work, but also take time to make sure that people are committed. Going back to my whitewater rafting analogy, that they're really committed to making sure that we're going to get through that set of Class 4, Class 3, Class 5 rapids safely, because we are all in. And we are all in. So I think that's another important one. The other thing I heard from Andrew that I think is really, really important, and I spoke to it at the beginning of this, at the top of the time together, is this notion of being, I would say, culturally versatile. That is, the ability to speak multiple languages, to speak multiple dialects, which means, back to what I said at first, it's about people and you must know them through and through. So that's it. I hope that you picked up some great nuggets today and are unstoppable at Craig. And here's to continuing the journey of building great teams. Thank you.